Ok. And I welcome Anna Reding, che è professoressa. Faccio la presentazione in italiano, siamo d'accordo. È docente di Culture and Creative Industries presso il King's College di Londra e dirige l'Arts and Humanities Research Institute e lo spazio innovativo REACH, che conduce ricerche socialmente impegnate e interdisciplinari che raccoglie 13 centri di ricerca, facoltà di arti e scienze umanistiche. Anna Reding ha avuto un ruolo di primo piano nello sviluppo del campo dei Media Memory Studies. È autrice e curatrice di 6 libri, tra cui, ne cito qualcuno, Gender and Memory in Global Age, The Social Inheritance of a Holocaust, Gender, Memory and Culture e Cultural Memories of Non-Violent Struggles. La sua ricerca, l'insegnamento e l'impegno nel senso di engagement e engagement in francese, si combinano con le sue esperienze e competenze anche come giornalista, drammaturga e accademica. Ha interessi di ricerca e ha pubblicato e ha avuto finanziamenti per progetti sulle tematiche del genere, la memoria, memoria e attivismo, sull'olocausto, sulla migrazione e la memoria digitale. È responsabile di molti progetti. Mi piace suggerire a chi ci ascolta di andare a vedere il breve video che si trova nella sua biografia, che abbiamo messo anche sul nostro carnet di ricerca, che si chiama Moving Arts ed è la restituzione video di 2 minuti di un progetto sulla memoria delle migrazioni che ho trovato assolutamente commovente e che dimostra come il legame tra la ricerca universitaria e la rappresentazione artistica possano andare di pari passo e siano esempi ottimi di collaborazioni. Anna Reding si impegna creativamente nelle questioni sociali attraverso le arti, quindi, e ha scritto alcune pièce, alcune opere teatrali, come Kiss Punch Goodnight, Want, Hardcore, Grandma's Garden, The Stoning, Falling, RP35, Cacti Earth e The Unkind, che sono state rappresentate nel Regno Unito e che sono state anche oggetto di studi e per esempio alcuni sono state studiate in un volume che si chiama In Your Face Theatre, British Theatre in the 90s e poi anche in Plays by Women. Quindi cito alla fine un altro testo molto forte e interessante che si intitola Letter to My Daughter, che è pubblicato in un volume che si chiama Gender and Memory in the Global Age e che comunque si trova anche online se lo cercate, e perché è veramente una specie di manifesto del suo pensiero e del suo impegno dal punto di vista dei memory studies e legati con il gender e anche con l'epoca digitale nella quale viviamo. So, thank you Anna for your speech, and I ask you to beginning speaking about rewilding and staging the more rewilding memory, staging the more than human. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza, and thank you very much for inviting me to this talk. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your work and just having a discussion in the sort of the second part of what we're going to do. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and hopefully it'll all work. We tested it earlier, so should do. That looks like it is sharing. Is that right? Everybody can see it. Good. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stand up just because. And I'm going to say to all of you, if you need to get up, move around, wriggle, switch your screens off and on, do, because it just drives us all mad, kind of, you know, sitting still the whole time in front of a screen. If we were doing this in a, you know, in a lecture theatre or in a group or in a classroom, we would be moving around. The other thing I just want to say is My daughter will probably come through this space when she gets back from school. My son will probably knock on the door really loudly. My cat will come and disturb us in a nice way. So, and the same for you. So don't worry about any of these wonderful interventions into our talk. They're all part of what we're doing. So this is, I'm going to talk on this topic of rewilding memory. And it's really just kind of so that I feel very fortunate to be able to do this with you, because it's part of a book project that I'm developing alongside another book project. And the book itself will talk about methods, memoirs, heritage, theatre and law, but I couldn't possibly talk about that in this talk, that's too much. So I'm going to talk broadly about, rewilding knowledge making, in the hope that that will speak to your different disciplines, because I know that you're coming to this from thinking about the Anthropocene from different disciplines, and that maybe can be some of the focus of our talk at the end. Then I'm going to focus on one particular research project which is called Autistic Dreaming, and forms its own book actually. It's looking at the ways in which autistic memoirs neuroqueer our knowledge and methods. And then the second example I want to look at comes from a book that I'm co-editing with Noam Tirosh, called A Right to Memory, and I've been writing about more than human memory rights, and so I'll focus a bit on that. I aim to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, but as I said, just do feel free to get up and move about. I want to start with a couple of terms that I've used in the title of this, but that also then might crop up as I'm speaking. The first is this term rewilding. Well, this isn't my term, is it? It's coined by environmental activists, Earth First, and then refined by ecologists. And it refers to environmental work to restore complex ecologies. And it's also inspired by eco-literature. Simon Barnes has said, we're not just losing the wild world, we're forgetting it. And so this term I've extended to refer to ways in which you and I can diversify academic knowledge through a human neurological diversity. And I talk specifically about autism. One of my children is autistic, and I've learned a lot about that. And I've also learned, I think, about my own neurodivergences, and I think that part of the process then of thinking about neurological diversity allows us to think about how we can diversify academic knowledge. The second then is more than human ecological diversity, and how we bring that into research. And within memory studies, this really does build on work by Amanda Barnier, Andrew Hoskins, who are addressing this dialogical relationship between what they've termed memory in the mind and memory in the wild. The other term then that I use is more than human, and more than human memory. And again, that's not my term, that comes from the philosopher and ecologist David Abrams. And then I've extended it to think about memory. And Abrams argues for this really interesting sense of the entanglement of human subjectivity with other animals, plants, and within varied bioregions, and discusses how indigenous knowledge conceives of human memories in the wild as connected with, mediated by, animated through land, rock, water, wind and air. And so I use and extend his sense of the more than human to explain the entanglements of individual human memories within our wider ecology of biota and abiota. And I was thinking this morning, as I was sort of just going through what I was going to say today, I feel very profoundly affected by the invasion of Ukraine, and I'm sure it's probably on your minds too. And it really does then make me think about the importance of the more than human memory as well. There's the massive human tragedies that will take place in this situation, but there's also then this huge impact that it is having already you know, if cruise missiles were launched last night, and undoubtedly some of them will be radiation tipped, and that will have an impact on those environments and the wider Earth environment. So I want to start then by, just to sort of go back to, yes, no, sorry, I'm just going to go forward there. So in the first part then, I just wanted to sort of talk about rewilding knowledge making more broadly. And, you know, this again is not, you know, my idea. There's sort of loads of literature out there that we can draw on, from James Canton's The Oak Papers. And if you haven't seen that, it's a wonderful book. He spends 2 years returning to the same oak tree and sitting underneath it and thinking then about the cultural significance of the oak, but within the context of this eco-ethnography. And it's a very good example, I think, to show students about this method of eco-ethnography. There's also books like Sue Stuart-Smith's The Well-Gardened Mind and Sarah Spencer's Think Like a Tree. And they inspired at King's, where I work, and when I was research director of an institute up until quite recently, I developed this project called Adopt a Plant, partly because I found that PhD students were quite lonely in their research, and many of them living in very small rooms in an urban environment. So we had this project where they could adopt a plant, they would meet to talk about their plants and water their plants in situ. And then of course the pandemic came along, and we had to tell them to take their plants home and foster them, which they did at home for the extent of the pandemic. And then we sent them boxes in the post, which included the ingredients for making seed bombs, which we then did online together. And then they were able to sort of walk off or cycle off during COVID lockdowns and throw them at verges. And hopefully those seed bombs have initiated various different plants. But the analysis of how this impacted on students was very positive, in terms of them working with plants in the context of the university, facilitating a different kind of connectivity and knowledge making. And that has since then been rolled out to undergraduates at King's, which is great in my view, as particularly as students are now returning to campus. So the thing I've kind of been thinking about in relation to my own work is, you know, what wild roots do I have? And so what extent is my or your research unconsciously biased in terms of being human-centric and extractive in its approach? We, you know, all of us, and I'm sure you too, seek to sort of work against that, but it's really quite strongly wired into my brain because of my own education, which has placed the human at the centre of everything that I think about. And Elizabeth Povinelli's work, Geontologies, I found very helpful in this regard, in terms of dismantling my understanding of a Western ontology and its connections to the rise of industrialisation and extractive industries. And I would add to that what we had in the 19th century was the rise of this neoliberal individualism, sort of cloaked onto a culture of human normalcy, which then disables neurodivergent knowledges. You know, and in that umbrella I would put, you know, neurodivergent knowledges arising from dyslexic people, people with attention deficit differences, autism, and other kind of memory differences that impact on the brain and body and knowledge making. So I then sort of have been trying to shift my own internal canon and think about eco-psychology rather than ego-psychology. And I've found Meredith Sabini's work on C.G. Jung, The Earth Has a Soul, very helpful. Rebecca Solnit's Orwell's Roses is really inspiring if you're a George Orwell fan. And she kind of uncovers his real love of nature, which isn't necessarily evident, I think, in the way that he's talked about. And I'm just looking at work from, you know, Gaston Bachelard to, you know, great feminist writers such as Mary Daly, and then connecting that to contemporary thinkers such as Robert Macfarlane's eco-writing, and Peter Godfrey's work, if you haven't come across that, on the on the octopus. It's called kind of Other Minds, which is a great book if you want to try thinking like an octopus. And then the other thing I've been trying to do is think about the denigration of knowledge making outside of the Western tradition, particularly Indigenous knowledge makers. And I found Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk, which is just here. If you don't know that book, it's incredibly inspiring, making you sort of rethink about how he says Indigenous thinking can save the world. Having said that, of course, it's really important not to take an extractive approach to Indigenous thinking. And, you know, I'm aware that I can fall into that very easily, thinking I'm going to sort of snatch bits from here and there. So just being aware of that in myself. I've also then sort of been thinking about how to wild my own methods. You've heard that I write plays. I've always written plays, use performance as part of what I do. And I've always kind of drawn and painted, but I've sort of brought that more firmly into trying to sort of think through on a more embodied and practice-based level. So this is some recent artwork. This one in the middle here is called Biliary Tree, and I was trying to think about the liver actually, and the liver as a biliary tree. My daughter hasn't been very well in terms of her liver, and so it's sort of making me think about that, but also think about my own sort of external knowledge around trees. So art is a really good way, it seems to me, within academia for us to work through different ideas using the process of femage. You know, femage is a sort of feminist way of doing collage in various different modalities, bringing together different different media really, and it allows you to immerse yourself in knowledge and dig through knowledge. And I'll show you a bit of that when I get onto my analysis around autism. So moving on to this second part then, this project is called Autistic Dreaming, and it has been inspired really, I think, as my journey as a parent. My son is autistic, and I think, found the best way to seek to understand better as a parent has been to read as many memoirs, blogs, look at artworks by autistic people. So the project centres those memory works by autistic people, and that was really important to me, to have them by autistic people, not about autistic people. And the overall research question really has been, how do autistic memory works, neuroqueer, key concepts and methods in gender studies, memory studies, and more broadly in media and communication, because that's what I've been largely trained in. And you'll see there on the right hand side, or left hand side, I'm not sure which side it is up for you, the staircase, the rainbow staircase, which is in our house. I found that there were sort of 5 themes that emerged. The first is around this idea of sense, and what makes sense and what is nonsense, what is defined as nonsense, particularly by neurotypical people in relation to those who are defined as neurodivergent. Oh, that's nonsense, right? That doesn't mean anything. Secondly, in terms of memory, and you know, often autistic people are defined as having memory deficits, executive functioning deficits, using a kind of medical pathological model. Thirdly, in terms of voice, you know, particularly within feminist writing, I've been very used to talking about giving people a voice, having a voice, etc. But what does it mean if you are not able to speak through your mouth, if you have aphasia, if you have to use technology assisted communication? What does having a voice mean? And then similarly with social media, there's an assumption that sociality is the norm, is a positive thing, whereas very often for somebody who is autistic, they're defined as antisocial. But actually when you read memoirs, it's a different kind of sociality, that sociality can occur through silent being with somebody, or silent being with a more than human tree, for example. And then finally, language. I'm going to sort of show a little bit later a bit of a video by Amanda Baggs, which just will sort of, I think, challenge your ideas around language. So the research then that I did was sort of using this process of thematic analysis and then femage in an art studio that I'm now currently renting, which just means I can be really super messy in that space in a way that I can't either at my office at the university, can't get into anyway because of the pandemic, or at home. And in terms of the theme of memory then, what emerged was that the memoirs, the memory works, amplified how human memories are co-composed through and with the environment, and with the media matter of environmental memories. And what I argue in an essay that's out shortly is that autistic people's memory works decenter human memories. I should say actually that the autistic people's memory works that I looked at, okay, that's really important, not everybody's, okay, the selection that I looked at, in three ways: deep ecological memory, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second, conversations with vibrant objects, and animating energies. And the artwork that you see in front of you, I called it tongue-tied, and in that piece I was sort of assembling and disassembling different thoughts and feelings in relation to what I was finding in the memory works in relation to voice and my thinking on voice, and that kind of helped me think through different ways of thinking about that. So in terms of deep ecological memory here then, I've just got a kind of quote from one of the writers that I've been looking at, who uses technology assisted communication because he has aphasia. He doesn't speak through his mouth, he speaks with a machine. This is Naoki Higashida, and you might have come across a film that was out last year, actually a documentary that is linked to his book, The Reason I Jump. And Higashida writes, "I think that people with autism are born outside the regime of civilization. Sure, this is just my own made-up theory, but I think that as a result of all the killings in the world and selfish planet wrecking that humanity has committed, a deep sense of crisis exists. Autism has somehow arisen out of this. Although people with autism look like other people physically, we are in fact very different in many ways. We are more like travellers from a distant past. And if by our being here we could help the people of the world remember what truly matters for the earth, that would give us a quiet pleasure." And one of the things that Higashida's memory work demonstrates is this sense of a deep ecological connection to the memories of physical objects around him. And this is also something that I had wrestled with in relation to my own son. You know, an example is on those rainbow stairs that you saw earlier, they're painted rainbow because when we came back from Australia, my son couldn't go near the stairs because he felt he saw that these were trees and they were screaming at him. And he felt that he could remember this sort of deep ecological memory of the wood. So by painting them, it kind of helped him get up the stairs in that way. So this is really interesting, it seems to me, and it goes back to Juncker Porter's sense, and I'll kind of draw from this later, is what is it in the north that we have forgotten, you know, that is then resulting in this ecological and conflictual catastrophe. And part of it, it seems to me, is the memory of the materials that we work with. And so the image on the left is really about that. It's about the clay that I was working with, which of course comes from the earth, speaking to me in some way as I worked with it. So I'm going to show you now just an extract by another autistic person called Amanda Baggs, which you can find on YouTube and watch for yourselves. Amanda Baggs very sadly died during the first part of the pandemic in the lockdowns, and but she leaves this amazing legacy, and I think this film has really changed my views of many things, and I've shown it many times to students and in research context. So I'm just going to show you this. Okay, what I'd really appreciate is if you could, just if you've got a pen handy or a notebook, just to note down for yourself any thoughts in relation to that video, just a sentence, a few words that arise for you. It may be that you've seen it before, it may be that you've not come across this, and just think then, what does that challenge for you in your area that you work in terms of maybe one of those themes of language or making sense, or maybe there's something else that comes up from that. Just spend a minute and feel free to wriggle in that minute as well, okay? Okay, I'm going to now show a reflection by Amanda Baggs herself about her work, because she's also able to type using assisted technology, and she provides a translation of this for us. So I'm just going to play that bit, and I'm going to give you a transcript as well.
The previous part of this video was in my native language. Many people have assumed that when I talk about this being my language, that means that each part of the video must have a particular symbolic message within it, designed for the human mind to interpret. But my language is not about designing words or even visual symbols for people to interpret. It is about being in a constant conversation with every aspect of my environment, connecting physically to all parts of my surroundings. In this part of the video, the water doesn't symbolize anything. I am just interacting with the water as the water interacts with me. Far from being purposeless, the way that I move is an ongoing response to what is around me. Ironically, the way that I move when responding to everything around me is described as being in a world of my own, whereas if I interact with a much more limited set of responses and only react to a much more limited part of my surroundings, People claim that I am opening up to true interaction with the world. They judge my existence, awareness, and personhood on whichever tiny and limited part of the world I appear to be reacting to. The way I naturally think and respond to things looks and feels so different from standard concepts or even visualization that some people do not consider it thought at all, but it is a way of thinking in its own right. However, the thinking of people like me is only taken seriously if we learn your language, no matter how we previously thought or interacted. As you heard, I can sing along to what is around me.
Okay, so I'm just going to focus a little bit in more detail on what Amanda Baggs says then. This is a transcript of particularly the early part, which I've sort of worked through using my own sort of art method as well. And I think, you know, what's challenging about this in terms of then thinking about the Anthropocene, thinking about what it means to rewild knowledge structures, is this question of, you know, what do we mean by language, and what does it mean to communicate? And this line that she has, it is about being in a constant conversation with every aspect of my environment, reacting physically to all aspects of my surroundings. I'm just interacting with the water as the water interacts with me. And I think that, as you'll see when I get onto the second project that I'm going to talk to you about in terms of wild justice, maybe there's something in that in terms of developing our own capacities to interact with the water as the water interacts with us, of seeing the living earth, feeling the living earth as a living being that communicates with us, and we communicate with the earth in that way. There's something I think really important in this. So the key thoughts then, and I don't have time today to sort of go through all of what I have been finding, but I'll cite at the end an article that if you're interested in it, you can have a little bit more of a look at if you're interested. Some of the key thoughts that I've had in terms of exploring the articulation of more than human memories within autistic life writing and artworks highlights this importance of the underlying ecologies of knowledge within studies of memory, and the ways in which normalcy lays waste to particular ways of knowing that Boaventura de Sousa Santos terms a broader diversity of world experience. So if we humans were to decenter how you and I remember ourselves, including our full ranges of human neurodiversity and not just neurotypicality, and turn then instead outwards to hear the world beyond our human traumas, our human wars, our human triumphs, and how much wilder might be, is my question, the field of memory studies, which I work in particularly. And Tyson Yunkaporta writes, as I mentioned earlier, we think something terrible must have happened in the north to make people forget. So, and that's the question that I think is sort of really comes through loud and strong in the autistic memory works that I've been looking at. So I'm going to move now on to the second project, which is part 3 of the talk that I want to do today. And just, I called it Wild Justice, and it builds on some sort of broader sort of strand of research of mine around this question of a right to memory. But it's thinking then about a right to more than human memory. Now, certainly within memory studies, how nature and the climate emergency is being remembered and witnessed is now a really strong growing area of research, and there's some really brilliant work that's emerging in that area. But one thing that's missing, it seems to me, is really this question of a right to memory and who and what has a right to memory. So the focus of this research then considers more than human memory rights, and I've tried to sort of bring bringing into dialogue Indigenous knowledges with the Earth Justice movement, and ask how to rewild transformative justice, and I mean that rather than transitional justice, through to more than human memory rights. And the question I'm sort of asking really is how you or I might see the needs and rights of the living planet conceptually, analytically and methodologically to create practices for human earth transformative justice, providing restitution for the living planet. And so I'm examining then current paradigms of a right to memory, practices and developing laws on more than human memory, and thinking about how to change my own human-centric paradigm and think about memory rights in a more than human way. So the first thing that struck me in thinking about this is that memory scholars, myself included, have been very concerned with the ways in which particular communities and groups structurally and symbolically dominate memory. But it's rarely considered, it seems to me, that this sense of mnemonic community is itself positioned through an anthropocentrism and a speciesism in which anything that is not human is deemed to be of lesser value when it comes to memory, mnemonic rights and justice. So the question then is, who is dominating who here? And it seems to me that who is dominating is the human being. We dominate memory, we control memory in relation to all other species. So the idea of more than human memory then extends Abrams' idea of the importance of the more than human, of the entanglement and entwinement of human subjectivity with other animals, plants, as well as the terrain of particular and varied bioregions that we inhabit. And if you're wondering what the image is on the screen, it's of a place in Romania where there is the largest gold mine in Europe. And you're able to see me and I'm able to see you on screen because of gold. You know, that the need for gold has exponentially increased with the internet, with digital technologies, because it's clean and it doesn't tarnish and it provides wonderful transmission. But it has consequences. So you and I looking at each other like this has consequences. It's not just that aircraft have consequences for the biosphere. This kind of human activity does as well. And that's the loss of a mountain and the loss of a place is the cost of the mine. And Tyson-Yunkaporta reminds us then that this moving around of minerals, which of course is there in your digital device that you're looking at me at and I'm looking at you at, and in the wires that connect us. In our law, Tyson-Yunkaporta says, we know that rocks are sentient and contain spirit. You can't just pick one up and carry it home, as you will disturb its spirit and it will disturb you in turn. Rocks are to be respected. Of course, we can only extract rocks, we can only mine them, we can only smash them up, destroy them, burn them, if we firmly believe that they have no spirit, that they have no capacity for animation, and they're completely dead, and in that respect we need not respect them as living beings in the way that Tyson-Yunkaporta suggests. So this brings us back to this idea of the extractive economy that Povinelli, that I mentioned in relation to Povinelli at the beginning. So what I would suggest then in relation to this sense of more than human memory rights that stretches beyond simply a right to memory is this sense that we need to make a distinction then between more than human memory's right to self-determination and to a collective obligation to remember rights abuses of the more than human in the form of ecocide. Do we need to make that distinction is the question. There may be a duty to remember, for example, extinct species or a dried up river system because they are non-human or more than human persons whose rights have been violated. Now, one of the things that one of the leading memory scholars, Jan Winter, has said is that the Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War is a memory document. and it kind of set going, in a sense, our obsession in the 20th and 21st century with memory. But what we then have more recently is the Universal Declaration of Earth Rights, and it seems to me that this implicates a far wider and deeper world of more than human memory, which is or will be our response to the crimes of ecocide. And the crime of ecocide is entwined with the crime of genocide. If you're using weapons of mass destruction, which we're fearing may be used, then there will be mass crimes of ecocide to the planet as a whole. So what then if we take an ecocentric rather than egocentric viewpoint that accords value to the whole of nature? The understanding, writes Juncker Porter, that we are no greater or lesser than a rock would certainly change things if a critical mass of people all came to it at once. And it brought me back again to that thought, what is it that Western civilizations had to forget to develop a knowledge paradigm based on human narcissism? So epistemologically then, and I think this connects the different projects that I'm working on, it's that sense of, does a more than human memory approach require new methods? And I think it does. It doesn't mean to say that we bin the methods that we've got, but we extend and stretch those, or at least I found that's helpful to myself. Garda Hansen and Volkmann in a forthcoming essay, which is in this collection called A Right to Memory that I've mentioned, have suggested that we need to think with who we're working with. And Kate Macmillan, who's a colleague of mine at King's, has said that we need to listen with our feet. So how do we relearn how to listen with our feet and think with and do research that thinks and feels with more than human persons as a biota, as well as how to think, feel, be with non-biological matter? Well, I've done some experimenting with that during lockdowns, which has sort of made us stay in our houses, but then when it was really tough, we were, I'm sure it was similar for you, you were only allowed out the house for certain things. So I really treasured being able to walk around my local park and get to know all the local sort of biota very intimately, actually, and it was really very interesting to see particular trees again and again and again every day. And as I said earlier on, there's this new wave of eco-literature, particularly in the English language, which is emerging, which offers embodied methods, and James Canton's The Oak Papers is a good example of that. Now, Berry maintains that all components of the Earth community have three rights that include the right to be, the right to habitat or a place to be, and the right to fulfil its role in the ever-renewing processes of the Earth community. And memory, I would suggest, is an integral part of these three rights: being, placing, renewing. And importantly, Berry argues that although rights are universally applicable, they are variable according to species. Now, this kind of blew my mind when I read this. Maybe it doesn't yours, but it did initially. I was thinking, oh my goodness. So do we then, by extension, conceive of memory and memory rights for biota that are also species specific? Do birds need bird memory rights and a tree memory rights? Well, yes, I think probably yes is the answer. It chimes very much with indigenous knowledge, in which biota does have its own forms of knowledge and ways of knowing. But if you have that, of course, then you need interlocutors between. You need people who can translate. You need other beings who can translate between. And you also need a sense then of laws at a national and international level that can protect. So with more than human memory rights, what I found was that actually if you look around the world, they're already there in various different countries and places. They include the right to memory of the earth and environment with trees, with the idea of country, with more than human persons, such as, for example, dolphins in India as non-human persons, Maori recognition of Hapu to mark storytelling between Tangata and Wena, And various rivers and landforms internationally do now have legal non-human or more than human person rights, such as the Whanganui River in New Zealand, its area, and such as in the Villicamba River under its legislation Rights for Nature in Ecuador. So in that case, if those entities have more than human memory rights, does the river have a right to recognition of its memories? And how is that done? How is that recognised? The other legal framework that is already there is the UN International Mother Earth Day, which is 2009. The recognition then of Mother Earth as a living being that may be violated in different circumstances if she is not protected. So memory rights then for the wider planet means ancient and new ways to read the world. And I would suggest then the need for eco-translators and eco-advocates. And a lot actually of sort of future memory science fiction has these advocates already. One of the books that stayed with me since the 1980s, and I'm a 1980s feminist, is Marge Pierce's Woman on the Edge of Time. And that book has this idea of eco-translators. But that's already happening too. If you look at Jonathan Keats' work, which is something that he's called the Plasmodium Consortium, what he did at his university was get it through a committee to make for the appointment of honorary professors who are slime moulds. Now you might think that's completely mad, right? When I first read that, I thought, oh my goodness. But actually, when you then look at the research, it's quite extraordinary what John Keats has done. He used slime moulds to then provide a more than human viewpoint on ethical questions and questions of movement in relation to borders and how living beings react to borders. I mean, it's quite, again, so there's that sense of, taking other viewpoints on board is not simply about taking on board viewpoints of other humans. There are ways and means. So just to sort of draw to a quiet close then, overall today, and I've kind of jumped from different projects that I'm interested in, but I was aware that, you're from different disciplines, so I've tried to sort of think about different areas of my work that might perhaps connect or speak with what you are doing, and I'm really interested in hearing more about what you're doing. The first question, which probably reaches all of you, is how we think about methods and designing our research. And I've suggested that it's possible to introduce different approaches to teaching and different approaches to research methods, which might involve having plants with us in the room. John Keats has slime moulds, different ways of thinking about knowledge production. And then in the second part, I drew on this project called Autistic Dreaming and looked at autistic memory works, memoirs, films, blogs, and just lifted out of that some of the findings that I have around the significance and importance of these three dimensions of more than human memory, of deep ecological memory, of conversations with material objects, of animating energies. And then in the third part, then I sort of try to draw that together by thinking about wild justice and what that might mean then at the level of a right to memory and expanding that to mean more than a human right to memory. So there's a couple of articles there that I've sort of will be out there very soon. They're in press. There's one called Rewilding Memory, which is with the Journal of Memory, Mind and Media, and I'm quite happy to share those with you if you want. And then there's also this chapter on Beyond Human Memory Rights, and the bigger part goes into these books that I'm writing. So if I can just end by saying thank you to my local land. So this is near where I live. I live in a very urban bit of London, but I was saying actually before most people arrived, I was saying to Eliza that in this part of London, socialists and feminists campaigned for this bit of land not to be built on in the 19th century. And this is a hilltop that I go to and that these stones actually were put there after sort of much thought in the year 2000. They're not ancient. And it's a very special place, and there's a restored lake, and there's a river that I can walk along, and all of that, all of those more than human persons have contributed to this talk today, and I hope their voices are present in some ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much to you. It was very, very interesting, and also it made me think a lot about your 3 points, because the 3 points are really, really compelling for us. Because I am thinking since quite a long time. I've been thinking about what can we do with our research to get out of our little world and to be heard if we have something interesting, and that we feel it's interesting to make the others also partage it. And the focus on the second point was very, very, very I don't know how to say in English, but it's a point of view really, really strong. And the main thing I appreciate in your way of telling us transmitting us your research, and also it's to change a little bit our point of view. And on the third point, in France there is a project called the Parlement de la Loire, a parliament, and they have already published a book with all the speeches that have been done in this parliament of the River Loire, and in order to make the river being considered as a person, right person that who has the rights, in order to preserve it as a real. Well, it's difficult to explain, but there is a book, and there is a project. The name is Le Parlement de la Loire, and the person, the artist, writer and researcher who deals it, his name is Camille de Toledo, and it's very interesting. And all you told us is, for me, is matching some points. And I have only a little question, then I give the word to my colleague Laura, but because I don't have a real question. But when you talked about the octopus, it's a translation of a French book, the octopus, because someone in France, as Vincent Després, is a scientist who is writing since 4 or 5 years, and she wrote her last book is on the thoughts of the autobiography of an octopus.
I don't think it's the same book.
Okay, so
but
no. So we have to. I'll give you some titles. Yes.
Brilliant. That would be great. And thank you for the Parlement de la Loire. I think I would definitely look at this. It sounds absolutely. You know, I think these campaigns are happening all over, so it's really interesting. You know, this. You know.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura, if you want.
Thank you. Of course, also from me. I have probably a silly question, and maybe you have been speaking about it for 1 hour. I just didn't get it enough. But how, according to you, we can really be in touch, understand the wild, since we are completely made of culture. We do not have any contact with the nature. Doesn't matter what do you mean for nature. But if I am in a countryside, I understand it through my culture. If I look at the grass, at the sun, at my cats, everything, this is through my being. That is a cultural being. That has nothing to do with naturality. So how can we, in a way, cross this border, make it permeable? And what do you really mean for wild in our world, which is also completely being I don't know, manipulated. This is not maybe the right term, but by us. But more than this, we do not have another way of seeing, understanding the world. For sure, also autistic persons. When I was looking at those films, I didn't have any particular thought. Of course not, and moreover, I didn't have any particularly smart thought, but just the feeling that this woman, she was just having the same contact that I see in my cats and this kind of I don't know, being in touch with the reality that is a bit different from mine, but not so different at the end. It's a bit just a shadow. There's a shadow of difference, not the real difference. And so, yeah, that's all. I don't know if my question was clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're interconnected, aren't they? And I think the question of how to change our own viewpoint when we're so immersed in the knowledge ontologies that we've been trained in, and the cultures that we live in. And I agree, you know, that sense of, you know, I live in a city, I live in a very urban bit of London, and at the same time, you know, I suppose I am thinking deeply about what does it mean then to think not about nature and culture, but about this question of wilding our viewpoint through and with the more than human. Because it's not about a return to nature, it's not about a nostalgic yearning for a time that actually we don't have. We can't go back to, you know, whatever that means. You know, I'm not sort of advocating that we all go and live in the countryside somewhere and you know, become self-sufficient. That wouldn't be possible for me as a human being, particularly in the way in which land is owned in Britain anyway. But it is about then moving towards a mindset where all beings on earth, whether that be a rock, or whether that be the air that we breathe, or whether that be a blade of grass, we can begin to conceive of it of having standing, of having legal rights, and not in the sense of, oh, well, that's the same as I'm thinking, but actually, and not even in the sense of tolerating difference, but accepting that actually the human viewpoint is tiny, both in terms of space and time. You know, we've been on the planet such a short time, we've committed such terrible atrocities, as well as remarkable, extraordinary, amazing things that humans have done as well. I'm not, you know, I'm not an anti-human human. I think the human species is extraordinary as well. but that process of being with that which is around us, whether it's the plant on my shelf there, or the sunshine out my window, or recognizing that the earth is in the screen that I look at and the things that I touch. And connected to that, I think, is this sense of, I didn't mean in any sense to say, oh, autistic people are different from neurotypical people. I don't actually think that it's such a big, I don't think there is a division like that. The division arises as a result, big knock on the door, that'll be one of my children coming home. That arises out of this 19th century fiction of normalcy. And normalcy means a certain viewpoint, of a neurotypical viewpoint that includes, for example, sociality, talking through one's mouth, etc., is deemed to have value over and above. Just my daughter's just said it's hailing outside, so let's bring the weather in. That actually it's about those connections, and I think in the autistic works that I looked at, what is really, really fascinating is that there's really interesting connections to, for example, works written within, oh lovely, hello. Absolutely gorgeous. There we are, you see, we have another viewpoint already who makes us smile and laugh, and yeah, my cat will be along soon, he's sleeping on the bed actually. Yeah, so it's about connection actually, and not thinking about culture, nature, or neurotypicality and autism, but listening across, working across, I think. And I think that's what I mean by...
So that's our ethical decision. This is...
Yeah, I think it's about a paradigm, isn't it? It's about a paradigm shift. And how different it would be if every university on the planet worked from a more than human paradigm in the social sciences and the humanities. You know, they might also have lots of plants in their classrooms and do lots more teaching outside, but it wouldn't be about, you know, teaching all students agriculture, but it would be a paradigm shift, where the moment with the cat is taken seriously, actually, you know, and so on. Sorry, I'll shut up now, otherwise other people won't have a chance. But thank you for your questions. I think
Thank you.
really important. And I don't have the answers either. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Esther?
Yes, I was lost in your speech with a lot of questions that arises, but it's a reflection more and a curiosity more than a question. I was wondering, what do you think about the new technologies, devices? If you think that they could be useful to get in touch with this private, intimate, new way of living environment. I mean, we are used to approach the environment with an haptic glance, with an haptic overview, so with a synesthetic way. In a sort of way, I think that technology could be useful to reenact a memory of an environment, because we could use our imagination, and although it's not a tool that could be related to an embodiment perception, it could be used from every kind of people. So what do you think about this tool? Do you think that do you most turn to technophobia, or do you think that could be a weakness tool?
Yeah, again, that's a really brilliant question, actually, and one I don't have the answer to, but I think one that I've been trying to explore. You know, I think that there's several points I want to make in relation to this. The first is that I think that new technologies offer extraordinary capacities for hearing voices that we haven't heard before. So the autistic memory works that I've been looking at are a really good example of that. Most of the works that I look at are by autistic people who are non-verbal. They aren't able to speak using their mouths and tongues, but they use assisted technologies and touch out words, or they have machine technologies, or other humans work with a machine to help them get those voices out. And either it comes out in typewritten speech, or it might come out in artworks and so on. But nonetheless, it's the reason for the huge rise in autistic memory works, and it has been really since the early 1990s, is because of digital technologies, and they've been fundamental to that, and I think they're fundamental to other marginalised groups as well. The other thing is that I think that some groups are making use of technologies such as VR and XR to great effect. So I have a PhD student who's looking at, there's an exhibition happening in Britain, in Plymouth, called Songlines, which is using virtual reality, and which is going to be in Paris next year, and Berlin in this spring, in May. And that uses virtual reality to communicate questions of country in an indigenous perspective on land to English people, you know, with the view that somehow this will rekindle a connection to land in the city of Plymouth. And so my research student is looking at that. It's a really interesting question, and I don't know, he doesn't know yet, but does it? What difference will it make? And the other thing that we've both been looking at, because that again they saw quite a big rise during the pandemic lockdowns, is nature apps. So for example, there was a sort of campaign to get people to count butterflies locally, and I realised that I only knew 2 kinds of butterflies. You know, so you know, every lunchtime in the summer I was going out with this app and trying to learn them. But I also realised that that was based on the sort of Linnaeus classification system, whereby we give something a label and we probably kill it and pin it up in a collector's thing. So that also signalled to me that there can be problems as well with the ways in which the technology is used. And I guess it's not the technology that's ever the problem, is it? It's how we use it and domesticate the technology and work with the technology in various different ways. And I think because my first love is theatre, I think that integrating performance, live performance, with technologies, which is what we all do, you know, when we're using our phones, right, we're performing with them in some way, aren't we? But incorporating that in a space. And a recent a play that I wrote 4 years ago, which I'm sort of developing at the moment, called The Unkind, which is looking at sort of London, in imaginary future London, when you know, the Thames has risen and where I live is completely underwater, and also there's been a war, and that hill that you've seen earlier is covered in minefields. I had envisaged with that is in its you know, the way in which it would be produced, having a choir, a live choir and performers, but also new technologies to immerse people into that space. And I think that combination is really effective, which I think probably your work also speaks to, which maybe you can, I don't know, what do you think about this?
No, I agree, because it's, you touched the point. I was thinking about the audio walking promenade that had been created during the COVID process, no? Like the example that you refer with butterflies. So is the way about we think about technology, not as protesters, but as a tool, a device. This is the difference. So yes, I got a lot of questions, but I don't want to abuse of your time. Also, I think about the use of robots with autism, because in some Oriental research, they use social robots like now, like toys, to improve the capacity of communication and creative also communication of some autist guy and girls, because they they recognize an alter ego, a no human, so they keep in touch more easily. It's something paradoxical, but it works. So I think that technology could be a very helpful tool in different kind. But it's not a substitute. It's not a substitute, and we cannot delegate our perception, our aesthetic perception, feeling perception to a device. That is something very, very, is a risk for this generation to approach the environment wholly with an app, an interface, or a prosthesis. So thank you.
Sorry, if I may add a very short story that I heard by radio 2 days ago. It was by the radio, so I didn't get everything, but it was maybe New Zealand or Australia. There was this species of bird, a very beautiful bird. Its teeth were used for regal something. And so the poor bird, it got extincted. But the indigenous people, they learn to repeat the song of the bird, the voice of this bird. And several years ago, these people, they got recorded. And so now we have the song of this extincted bird. So it's through an animal, a human being, and a device. And I found this story very nice.
Yeah, it's a really brilliant story, actually, isn't it? That really emphasizes the relationality between different communities of being, it seems to me, you know. Yeah.
Any other questions? I think I've seen another hand up before, but now it is no.
Yeah, it's me. But I have just a really naive question, and well, it's related with the last part of Anna's presentation, and I was wondering which way do you think that humanities and arts might affect the concrete way we'll deal with the ecosystem. So of course, in addition to the various linguistic efforts in defining our epoch, such as the term Anthropocene, or what Elisabeth Povinelli said about that, are there any other cultural acts that actually might help in that, beside the idea of conceiving a sort of post-nature paradigm?
Yeah, that's a really, really fascinating question.
I mean, it's a little bit.
One of the things that go on, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and this isn't, I don't know if this is an answer, but is sort of one of the things that's integral to theatre is the human being. You know, you're writing about human dramas. So what happens then? Can you, so I'll put a question back to you. Can you create theatre without humans?
Of course not, because they're fundamental. I mean, the human relation is fundamental about that. And for some ways, actually, yeah, I think so.
Well,
I disagree.
Yeah, okay, go on, Esther.
It's relevant, actually, but
there is a spectator, the audience was the human. So maybe the performance could be made only by a robot or a non-human entity, a synthetic agency, but there is a spectator, the audience, that could be the community and the human part. So actually, you could make performance or theater drama without human, but you have to, there has to be an audience that watch and recognize what do you made. Or you can have only an image of a human, so an avatar, I think. But this is my opinion, but because I'm really interested about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of rediscovered there was a tradition within Victorian England of plant theatre. I don't know whether you've come across that. And I mean, I've just seen photographs of it, of a sort of a mini theatre with plants on it that people would then sit down and watch, right? And so that did sort of shift my thinking a bit. And then it also made me think about the extent to which much Western theatre is very human-centric, but that isn't necessarily the case within a broader tradition of theatre. Sure, it might be humans acting as other more than human persons. They might act the part of a tree. In fact, Shakespeare does that, doesn't he? He plays around with that in the Scottish play. You know, he has trees moving across the stage. He has a bear enters, right? So it also made me think about, in my own work, what I've done in terms of more than human presences within theatre. So I suppose in answer to your question, which was, you know, you said, are there any other cultural acts which may assist us in terms of understanding better, you know, what humans are doing to the planet? I don't think that's quite what you said. So
yeah.
Something like that. My answer is, every time you or I say that's not possible, to say, but it might be. So the question I asked then about theatre is to, you know, if I say to you, can there be a theatre without human beings? And my initial reaction myself is, of course there can't be. You know, I've been trained to think about character, plot, and the plot is around the humans, and you've got a story arc, and that's the same for film, and that's, you know. So then just stop yourself thinking and think, well, let's move my paradigm and just say, how could it be? Just as a thought experiment, really, not to then have to go off and write some theatre that might be from a more than human perspective. Although I do have a colleague who, you know, writes poetry from a more than human perspective. And I think there's people writing in eco-literature that are very much writing from the perspective of a whelk, from the perspective of water, from the perspective of an air molecule, you know. And I think that does enable us to just get out of this human narcissism, which is part of the problem. It's not just the problem, it's actually very central to why capitalism has just galloped ahead in the way that it has. Even in your lifetime and my lifetime, it's accelerated massively. So I think that it's about asking those questions, and then if we say no, just asking them again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And you make me think about another question, because I've been working on this kind of reflection, Anthropocene and all the stuff for 2 years now. And one question I can't answer one question, because I agree with what you say. I appreciate all the projects that we have talked about now. For example, le Parlement de la Loire, etc. But once you state that we are the problem, what can we do? Because you were saying we can understand better what humans are doing. Okay, And then there are some people, the eco-writers, eco-criticists. There are a lot of paths that are that people take, but at the end, what can we really do, or is it an ethical issue that we can take, or we know, we study, and we take in contact with the reality, and with the realities also, the many realities, and on the center there is always us, the humans, and what we are doing to our environment, our earth, etc., etc. But then, is there something else? Is there can we switch with to not a solution, but another perspective, or we stay in the position of an observer? What do you think? It's my question. Thank you.
It's a really brilliant question, actually, and it's probably the most important question, and it's the question that I return to frequently. I think that, you know, I can only really speak for myself, in the sense of I don't really feel that I have the right to go around saying what we should do, because I think that actually what's important is to think about what you can do and I can do. What I find helpful is, number one, it's in terms of teaching, you know, and I think that teaching my students is a great honour, and a most extraordinary process happens, an alchemy happens every year that is just extraordinary. When there's a degree of honesty about the difficulties that I'm facing, that they're facing, the fear and the anxiety of the world that they are in, that we're in together, and working with them on that journey, if I have them for a term or a year, and keeping those connections going with those students who really connect with me as best I can. And again, I only have so much capacity as a human being, I know that. But that, it seems to me, if I have the honour of being in a classroom with 15, 20-year-olds who are then going to be going out into the world, and who are going to be here on this planet a great deal longer than I will be, hopefully, then they are the people who can make the difference in the future. And they often arrive out of the schooling system that they've had, whether it's in Britain or other parts of the world, in a state of utter repression and shock. They have been crushed through a system to produce certain kinds of exam results to get to do the degree. And so, as I see it, what I can do is help them find that spark inside of themselves that is there, absolutely, so that they can take that forward in various ways. And what I've found is that using different methods in the classroom is really important, just as it is within research. So getting people, we're probably all getting really stiff and bothered now sitting down like this, okay, but allowing some sense of movement, encouraging it, in fact, you know, and using different ways of moving around the room, different things that they can work with, taking them for walks, doing different things. That's important. So that's in terms of my professional life. And then I think I've also found that it's just that thing of trying to make sure that my personal life is not bifurcated from my research. So you will have seen, you know, that the reason I'm focusing on autistic memoirs is because I am the mother of an autistic son who is teaching me every day to be a better person, quite frankly. I don't think I was a very good mother to begin with. I don't think I'm that brilliant now, quite frankly, but I'm learning, and I learn with my children. And I think within the academy, you know, I was trying to sort of keep my children out of the academy, right? And so now I include them, not in the sense of taking them into the classroom with me, but thinking about how we're learning together in being in the world. And then the other thing is, for me, what's important is, I'm a Quaker, so that is something that's been integral to my thinking spiritually, but also politically. You know, the number one testimony of the Quaker is that we don't take up arms. And, you know, I spent time as an activist in the 80s at Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and in that space, that was an extraordinary space that brought together thinking around ecology, thinking around peace, thinking around equality, and lived it in that space because it was occupied at the airbase, and it subsequently successfully got those nuclear weapons removed, and all of us who were arrested were pardoned. And that taught me that it is important when you can, and people can't always, when you can sit down and do something. I say sit down because actually it often involved sitting down rather than standing up. Collectively, connectively, then do it. And it's not actually about shouting either. You know, I really hate protests where people are just shouting the same slogan. One of the things that I think I've learned is that singing is really very important. If you think about the Baltic Way, which I'm reminded of in the current invasion of Ukraine. If you don't know the Baltic Way, Google it after this, right? It's the most extraordinary thing in terms of the numbers, hundreds of thousands of people that connected the Baltic states peacefully, singing in order to protect those countries in their emergence for independence. So I would say non-violence, I would say where possible, again it's a struggle, right? It's a struggle, and in the current situation it's going to be more of a struggle, and integrating as much as one can the different parts of one's life and hearing them speak to different parts of the other parts of one's life, and teaching. You know, I get really cross with colleagues that think that teaching is an annoyance. No, it's not. It's what we're here to do, and our research should inform our teaching and sort of lead it, but it's not. The teaching is the prime thing, it seems to me. So I don't know, but that's for me, right? And I think each of you will have different things that you're already doing, actually, that are really important.
Yes, thank you. And I feel the teaching as you feel it, and I agree 100% with you. It's our mission, our primary mission.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for these beautiful words.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Your question was a great question. Yeah. I'm wondering if there's anyone who maybe hasn't got their camera on who would like to say hello and who's feeling a bit shy. I completely
Anna,
yeah.
Giovanna, Chiara. About Anna, you were talking about the Annas at your university. At ours, we have the Chiaras. We have Chiara F, Chiara R, Chiara B.
Also Laura's.
Laura's also. Laura's SS. Oh, well, it's quite difficult.
Okay, it was a great meeting.
Julia.
And I hope we will continue to cooperate in the future, because well, really, I think we have many things to share, and many things to learn from you.
Well, if anyone talks, I'll tell you that I have a project, and I've to do with the students. I don't know how to say, but Anna will help me. Un orto botanico, orto sinergico at our university in the garden of the Albergo dei Poveri. It's a project that I have, we have a big piece of earth that is not cultivated, nor entretenu, and I have this idea to do it with the students. Anna, please explain.
I don't know. I think it's called the synergical vegetable garden or something like that, with synergical agriculture, each other. So that I think everything else was clear.
And you gave me the idea to re-engage with this. I will think about it again.
Yeah, I think again these projects are really brilliant, because it's also that thing of creating a community and connection, because I think that one of the biggest problems, and the lines have been redrawn, haven't they, with the pandemic. I was noting that, I think in my community where I live, that the line is drawn at the front door. We have virtually had nobody cross the threshold for 2 years, and that's such a peculiar thing. I mean, sure, we meet for walks, but anything then that can bring people together out of a sense of fear and isolation and loneliness, actually, and then people get talking. And I think doing is brilliant, because if you do something together, whether it's making a heart, whether it's digging a garden, whether it's cooking, knitting, creating, then you get to talk in a different way, and it means that people don't have to look each other in the eye either. Great stories put by that, isn't there, in Western discourse? You must look people in the eye, but actually a lot of people don't want to. They want to do something together and then be able to ask about the object for help, or to dig the earth, and I think that then that's how we learn and build communities, which are there anyway, but it's just, and it doesn't matter how long or short they last, whether they last for an hour or a day or 10 years, it's there for those moments, and that's what's important. So that project, maybe I can come over and help dig the ground. That would be great, and plant some. That would be wonderful. Yeah, and we could have a planting at King's. King's is extending. We've got there's a big, horrible, hostile road outside of King's, which we've managed to get closed down permanently. So for the first time for 150 years, there will be no traffic. It's been sent off elsewhere, and so that whole area is being sort of greened, and then students and staff will be able to spill out into this lovely area, and it's making people rethink how to do our teaching, whether we might teach outdoors a bit more with umbrellas, because it always rains in Britain, right? But and so just, I think these things can help, yeah.
So, any other word from? So, I think that we can thank you again, Anna, for her words, for her generosity also, if you say this in English, and see you soon, I hope, and thank you very much again. E grazie a tutti. Thank you to everybody who were here.
Bye.
Grazie, and thank
Thank
you for
Thank
Grazie,
you.
Anna.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
joining me.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.
Ciao.